Why doesn't he tell you how wrong slavery is? Well, before we get into this a little bit more, I need to clarify that slavery here is different from the slavery that we naturally jump to as Americans in 2026. Roman slavery was not strictly a racial thing. Typical slavery was an economic thing or a result of war. There's a big difference between first century Roman slavery and the race-based slavery from American history. Roman slavery was usually the result of military conquests or people actually selling themselves into debt to survive. Slaves were made up of everyone from different professions even. Doctors and teachers and accountants and manual laborers were actually slaves. Now that being said, it doesn't make it okay. It was still a system without basic human rights. And slaves were legally treated as property. But again, for Paul to address the slaves directly in a public letter was a pretty big deal culturally. In that culture, slaves were essentially invisible. By speaking directly to them, again, Paul gives the moral agency and spiritual dignity to them. He treats them as responsible members of a theological community. And he doesn't start some sort of political revolt that would have crushed the Roman legions and all this stuff. He introduced a theological truth that made the systemic oppression of another human being spiritually impossible over time. In a way, Paul is undermining slavery from the inside. Later on in verse 9, Paul even goes on to say that they're equal before God. But he reminds the church that there's no partiality with God, also in verse 9. What he's doing is he's planting the seeds that eventually lead to the end of the institution of slavery, even though there's still plenty of slaves today. Paul says something similar in 1 Peter chapter 2.